Congress to basically tie Donald Trump's hands and end the conflict. They say that's not America first, that's Israel first.
There is so much concern about what all this is going to do to energy markets, oil prices, gas prices, not just in the region, but around the world.
Stay with Al Jazeera for the latest developments.
Like and subscribe.
On Counting the Cost, from Europe to Asia, countries are searching for alternatives to Middle Eastern oil and gas. What options do they really have? Is Russia the biggest winner? Who stands to gain and who will pay the price if the war drags on? Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza, the same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
I think he's toast. Start a poll there. No, wait.
Hello, it's 22 GMT. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha, and you are watching our extensive coverage of the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. I'm Riley Carlson.
All right, got a poll up.
Missiles hit multiple sites across central Iran's Isfahan province. At least 15 people have been killed. U.S. President Donald Trump says allies who rely on Gulf oil must help keep the Strait of Hormuz open.
No.
The Iranian Revolutionary Guard warns people across the Gulf to evacuate areas near oil ports. Israel launches strikes in southern Lebanon, killing 4 people in Sidon. There's growing concern of a possible ground invasion.
Why not?
And the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is targeted in a missile strike for a second time in less than a week. Factions supporting Iran are intensifying their attacks on foreign outposts. From the global energy shock to unprecedented attacks on Gulf nations, the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran is showing no signs of de-escalation. The conflict is only getting wider and deeper, with all sides refusing to back down. Hundreds have been killed, millions are displaced. This was the scene in central Iran's Isfahan province, where there have been multiple U.S. and Israeli strikes. One attack killed at least 15 factory workers. The Iranian capital, too, came under heavy bombardment. Nearly 1,500 people have been killed since the U.S. and Israel began the war with the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Iran has once again responded with strikes against Israel, as well as regional countries that host U.S. assets. At least 7 people were injured by fragments of a rocket in the Israeli port city of Eilat. Air raid sirens have been sounding across the country for days now. In the U.S., after bombing Iran's most important oil hub, the Karg Island, President Donald Trump now says allies who rely on oil moving through the Strait of Hormuz must secure its passage. He says some countries are sending warships but didn't provide details. Iran has blocked shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, through which about a fifth of global crude oil and liquefied natural gas normally transit.
Now he wants everyone to bail him out.
And in Iraq, the U.S. Embassy is asking all Americans to leave the country immediately. Officials warn there is a, quote, significant threat posed by Iran-aligned terrorist militia groups. The U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad was hit by missiles earlier on Saturday. Al Jazeera has confirmed the attack destroyed part of the embassy's air defense system. We are live in Erbil, Amman, Beirut, Doha, Washington, D.C. as well. But first, we're going to head to Tehran and speak to Mohammed Val, who is live for us in the Iranian capital. Mohammed, what can you tell us about the strikes that have been hitting around Iran on Saturday?
Right. The major strike that you have just mentioned is in Isfahan, in the middle of the country. And according to Reuters and also according to Fars news agency, the semi-official news agency, 15 factory workers were killed. And that factory manufactures refrigerators and heaters. So there is a hint there that it is a civilian facility. We know that Isfahan has been at the receiving end of endless strikes every single day since the beginning of this war. Isfahan is very strategic, not only its location, but also the amount of industries there in that area, and also
So we're
most
just
importantly some of the outstanding or the most important nuclear reactors or nuclear facilities in that region. We know that the nuclear facilities are at the top of the list of the targets for the Americans and the Israelis. Right now, we don't know what happened there in terms of those nuclear facilities, but there is daily bombardment. The authorities don't give much information about what has been hit and the impact. But that's a very important place in Iran that is targeted every single day. There are also other places like Bandar Abbas has always been receiving bombardment, including today, Sirjan in Kerman province, Tabriz, but Tehran, the capital, also has a lot of bombardment today and yesterday. Today, the Revolutionary Guard talked about shutting down 3 drones in the skies of Tehran. Tehran has been at the center of this fight around the city, or almost around the clock. There is bombardment here in Tehran. The Revolutionary Guard has announced the 51st wave of the so-called True Promise campaign or True Promise operation against the US and Israel, and it has talked about a long list of targets in Israel and also other regions across the Gulf.
Now, Mohammed, I want to know from you if there's been any reaction or what officials inside Iran have been saying about Friday's attacks on Karg Island, and if it has gone far enough for what the U.S. president was hoping for, which is a change in how Iran is managing the Strait of Hormuz at this point.
Right, Riley, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz is now at the center of this conflict. The Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi gave an interview to an American TV outlet in which he said that during the night, some of the weapons or some of the missiles that targeted the Karg Island came from the United Arab Emirates. He said that they were specifically HIMAR, short-range HIMAR American-made missiles, and that was a source of very critical talk from the foreign minister, saying that those rockets were launched from civilian areas or areas that are very close to civilian people, including in Dubai and in Ras Al Khaimah, something that Iran has been warning about all the time, saying that first, the Gulf region countries should not allow the Americans to use their space, land and waters to launch strikes against Iran. And most importantly, they should not allow those strikes to be launched from places that are very close to civilian areas. Iran has the right, they say, to defend itself, and that includes striking back at the sources of every missile that is launched against Iran. Imagine...
Absolutely, they should be striking everybody.
I just want to talk about one very important point here, which is, again, the Strait of Hormuz. There are 2 narratives that are competing now with regards to the Strait of Hormuz. One is American. America is calling upon international countries to send warships to protect the Strait of Hormuz, to protect the passage of energy through that waterway, and describing Iran as the country that is blocking that road and creating this international crisis. Iran is trying to defeat this narrative, saying that the Strait of Hormuz is not closed, and Iran hasn't closed it. It is closed only to American and Israeli ships and ships that belong to the countries that are cooperating in this war with Americans and Israelis against Iran.
Yeah, this is a very important narrative war that is happening right now. Mohammed Val in Tehran, thank you. And let's take that point now to John Holman, who is joining us live from Washington, D.C. John, because we've heard the president say or post on his Truth Social that countries of the world that receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage, and we will help. So the president is hoping that other countries that are feeling this pressure from sort of the oil blockade or the lack of oil that's getting through the strait are going to come and help America start moving these tankers through. Is that the plan right now, according to people in Washington?
Well, it's definitely something that President Trump's put out on Truth Social. Whether that means that it's a plan that's been widely discussed and is ready to execute, I guess is another thing. Going from past experience, it's not something that we've heard from the Secretary of War or from the Treasury or the Energy Department. At the moment, it's just a social media post from Donald Trump himself, just talking about the countries that he listed in that post that he felt that should help: China, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK and others. And I think the word that he uses that is key is hopefully they will do that. So it doesn't seem like it's a done deal yet. We do already know that France has already sent, a few days ago, said that it was sending 10 ships to this region, some of which could potentially be used to help escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. But that's the only one of those countries so far that we know that is actually committed to sending any ships.
And we have heard the Pentagon say a couple times that escorting ships through the strait is very complicated and that they don't quite have a plan for that yet. Meanwhile, John, the head of the U.S. Federal Communications Commission has warned broadcasters that they could risk losing their licenses if they air hoaxes and news distortions. What is he talking about here, and how are people reacting in the U.S.?
Yeah, I guess he's to give the context as well. This all began with Secretary of War Pete Hegseth in the Friday morning briefing. He really went for the media, talking about fake news, calling out headlines like one from CNN saying that the conflict, the war, is widening, which seemed a fair enough comment given the amount of Gulf countries that have been hit during this conflict. But he said the news headline should be more patriotic in its essence. President Trump then took up the baton, and he was tweeting about this or truthing about it, as he calls his own the Truth Social media site last night and this morning, complaining about headlines and articles. He actually complained about one in the Wall Street Journal about 5 planes that were damaged on a base in Saudi Arabia. The things he was complaining about, I read the article when it came out, and it seemed that he was complaining about things that the article didn't actually state, but he's now been backed up by the supposedly independent chair of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, who said what you just quoted, that broadcasters that aren't operating in the public trust could lose their license. This is something that's come up before. I'm not sure if our audience will remember last year with a situation with Jimmy Kimmel and some of the things he said that President Trump and his party took umbrage with, and there were threats as well by Brendan Carr. So it seems at the moment that President Trump isn't happy with the way that the media narrative of his war and the problems with it, the Strait of Hormuz, the lack of a regime change in Iran, the objectives like the nuclear, getting hold of the precursors to the nuclear weapons, that none of those seem to have happened yet, and the reporting on that. And he's wanting something a bit more positive coming from certain segments of the press.
John Holman in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. Israel's defense minister says the conflict has reached a turning point and that it will continue as long as necessary. Israel Katz put the onus on the Iranian people, saying it was up to them to overthrow their government and end the war.
The Iranian people
We're entering the decisive phase of the struggle between the regime's attempts to survive while causing increasing suffering to the Iranian people and surrender. Only the Iranian people can put an end to this in a determined struggle until the terrorist regime is overthrown and Iran is saved.
Rory Challens has the latest updates on Israel from Jordan's capital, Amman, and joins us now. Rory, what more have Israeli officials been saying about how this offensive against Iran is going?
Well, those are the kind of bullish statements that you're hearing in public from Israeli officials. Decisive phase. They're also talking about how 200 targets have been hit in Iran in the last 24 hours. But beneath the surface, things might not be looking quite so rosy. The media outlet Semaphore has an exclusive report which is saying that the Israelis have gone to Washington, D.C. to say to the Americans that they are running pretty short on interceptor missiles. Now, these interceptors are what stand between Iranian missiles and Israeli cities. There are 3 systems that the Israelis are operating at the moment. The US THAAD system, the Arrow system, which is a joint Israeli and American system, and Patriots, which again is an American system. And they're burning through these interceptors at a pretty significant rate. The use of cluster munitions by the Iranians is also compounding this effect for the Israelis. And another thing that is just breaking at the moment is that there has been this evening a pretty extraordinary government procedure where government ministers have been phoned up and told to approve or asked to approve an emergency reallocation of the state budget with a bridging loan for defence procurements. Now, we don't know whether this is because of this interceptor shortage or whether it's to do with wider war procurement goals, but it does suggest a growing strain on Israel as it fights a significant war on two fronts, with the Gaza war not yet in the rearview mirror.
All right, Rory, stay with us. We're going to come back to that second front in just a moment. But first, more Israeli military movement has been seen in southern Lebanon. Several tanks have been moving around the border area on Saturday. This comes after Israeli attacks killed more than 30 people in separate airstrikes, including medics and nurses. In recent days, Lebanon's government has expressed a desire to hold direct talks with Israel to ease tension and stop the fighting with Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Israeli forces continue to launch airstrikes across the rest of the country. Most attacks on Saturday have been focused on the south. The army says it's targeting locations linked to Hezbollah. This is the aftermath of an Israeli attack on the town of Gassanieh. Buildings and residential homes have been destroyed in the attacks on the south, leaving thousands of people displaced. And in nearby Sidon, 4 family members were killed in an earlier Israeli airstrike. The attack targeted a specific house and sparked a fire on the second floor. Israel says the family had connections to Hezbollah, but a relative says no one in the family was with any political party. The United Nations Secretary General has visited Beirut, which has also been under repeated Israeli attacks. During a press conference, Al Jazeera's Bernard Smith asked Antonio Guterres about the legality of Israel's forced evacuation orders across Lebanon.
As a matter of fact, evacuation orders in a situation where so many vulnerable population exist in the areas that are asked to be evacuated does not create enough security for civilians. And whatever does not create enough security for civilians inevitably becomes in violation of international humanitarian law. The protection of civilians is the maximum responsibility of any country at war.
Unless you're
and
killing
it applies
children
in
a
Lebanon
school.
today as it applies everywhere in the world.
And Heidi Pett joins us now live from Beirut. Heidi, this is where it gets difficult, isn't it? Because Antonio Guterres is talking about these forced evacuation orders that have sent hundreds of thousands of people out of their homes and where strikes have been happening. But at the same time, we are seeing strikes in places that are not getting forced evacuation orders, that are hitting buildings that people are being killed in, that people have no warning that they're coming.
Yeah, over the last week, there have been a number of what we have taken to calling targeted assassination strikes across the capital, but also across the country. There was one as far north as Tripoli, in fact, last week. But over the last couple of days, there's been an increasing number of these attacks in areas of the Lebanese capital, Beirut, in suburbs that you would not expect. So about, daybreak this morning, in fact, there was a strike on an apartment building in Burj Hammoud. That apartment building had actually been targeted twice in 24 hours. So Israel was clearly had some kind of intelligence that there was somebody in that building that they thought was there